Yoko! Yoko!
Oh, what have I done?
Yoko!
What's going on, vinyl community? Welcome to another video with the Record Spinner. In today's video, I'm going to be doing an analysis of the Avant Garde works of John Lennon and Yoko Ono. Yes, I did it. I listened to the trilogy of albums that they did together that I'm sure perplexed many people and the record-buying public at large over 50 years ago, and man, were my ears in for a rude awakening. But in this analysis, I'm going to focus on each record that they did early on in their career, how I personally feel that what they did is art in its own right, but then there will be the question of if these albums needed to be released to the public in the first place. We have a lot to get through in this video, so enough of the chit chat, let's jump into what this video is all about. So before we tackle the records, we must start back at the beginning. Yoko Ono was holding an art exhibit called Unfinished Paintings and Objects at the Indica Gallery in London back in November 1966. While she was setting up the exhibit, gallery owner John Dunbar stopped by with John Lennon. The story goes is that there was a hammer a nail piece where patrons can hammer a nail into a board, thus creating the piece. But since the exhibit had yet to go live, John Lennon wanted to hammer a nail, much to Yoko's distaste. She said that he could hammer a nail for 5 shillings, to which she replied that he would give her 5 imaginary shillings to hammer an imaginary nail. So it wasn't so much the magical of first meetings, but there was a piece that involved going up a ladder and putting a magnifying glass to a painting which had the word yes, which John thought was very uplifting for a change. But there was certainly a connection because Yoko would be phoning John and visiting him at his house, and at the time, John was still married to Cynthia Powell, and when she asked why Yoko was phoning him, John replied that Yoko was trying to obtain money for her quote-unquote avant-garde bullshit. Then the Beatles head off to India in 1968 to meet with the Maharishi, and John writes the song Julia. While named after his late mother, it contains the lyric, "Ocean Child Calls Me," and the kanji translation of Yoko is Ocean Child. John's marriage to Cynthia was very much on the fritz, and she went out on a holiday in Greece back in May of 1968, and while she was away, John and Yoko spent the night together. They played each other's avant-garde tape experiments, and it was at Yoko's suggestion that they would make an album together, which became Unfinished Music #1, Two Virgins. And the intent of this Unfinished Music series was to document their lives together on record, which romantically sounds like a nice thing, but later on we'll get into if the public had benefit from this. Now, basically, this album consists of various tape loops with John playing random instruments and sound effects, and then Yoko's traditional vocalizations in response to the sounds. Now, aside from Yoko's contributions, you can see where a track like Revolution 9 on the White Album gets its influence from, since John, along with George Harrison, were really pushing the envelope in terms of doing avant-garde tape experiments and applying it to the Beatles' musical palette. And it was also John's first project that didn't involve any help from his other bandmates. Perhaps the most notable aspect of this album is the album cover, which features John and Yoko completely nude on the front and behind on the back. Now, even though this came out through the Beatles' own label, Apple Records, after persuading the other Beatles for 6 months to put it out, pushing its release to November of 1968, the album ended up getting distributed by Track Records in the UK and Tetragrammaton in the USA, since EMI refused to produce the cover. So it was a case where they oversaw the pressing of the album, and then jackets were printed by a company called Technique, and they ended up having to get fans involved that hung around the Apple headquarters or at Abbey Road to package the record. And of course, due to the controversial nature of the record, distributors stored the record in a brown paper bag. Yoko had become pregnant but suffered the miscarriage of a male child shortly after John and Cynthia's divorce was finalized in November 1968. She was at Queen Charlotte's Hospital and John was right by her side the whole time, and that is where the cover of their next album derives from, which is called Unfinished Music No. 2, Life with the Lions. Now, a portion of the record was recorded during the hospital stay, particularly No Bed for Beatle John, which features them vocalizing various press clippings about themselves, and how, as you can see on the cover, John is sitting right by her side since he could not get a bed for himself. And then this is preceded by Baby's Heartbeat, which is a recording of Yoko's miscarried child's ill-fated palpitations, which is kind of sorrowful to both think and hear. And then this proceeds with 2 Minutes of Silence, which is basically what it is titled, 2 Minutes of Silence. And then there is Radio Play, which is just sounds of the radio with John and Yoko talking in the background. And that is just the B-side of this record. Flash forward to March of 1969, where Yoko was set to perform at a free jazz concert at Lady Mitchell Hall within Cambridge University. She was originally going to cancel her performance, but John persuaded her to perform, and he also joined her on stage, which was very significant since it was the first time that a Beatle performed live without the other Beatles. And this performance takes up the entire first side of the album, which is a 26-minute improvised piece called Cambridge 1969, which features Yoko vocalizing and screaming while John had his back to the audience and was creating electric guitar feedback. And towards the end of the performance, saxophonist John Tichikai and drummer John Stevens joined the two, and what ended up being featured on the album is actually a shorter version of what was performed. The album was released in May 1969 and was released on Apple's subsidiary label Zapple, which was predominantly for Avant Garde records such as George Harrison's Electronic Sound. In March 1969, John and Yoko got married in Gibraltar, and during their honeymoon, they staged their infamous bed-in in Amsterdam, held a Bagism press conference in Vienna, and sent acorns to heads of states in various countries for them to be planted as a symbol for peace. It was all of these events that became immortalized in the lyrics of the Beatles single, The Ballad of John and Yoko. It was also the central theme of John and Yoko's final Avant Garde album, simply called The Wedding Album, which was released in October 1969 in the US and November 1969 in the UK. Now, musically, Side A features a piece called John and Yoko, which features them saying each other's names with various degrees of emotion and volume to the rhythm of their heartbeats. Side B features a piece called Amsterdam, which features various interviews and conversations taken from their bed-in Amsterdam, along with some musical interludes. Now, music aside, this album was packaged absolutely beautifully. It comes in a box which includes a replica of their marriage certificate, illustrations by the both of them, a fold-out poster of photos, a postcard, a booklet of press clippings, a picture of a slice of wedding cake that came in an opaque white bag with Bagism on it, along with the record stored in a gatefold sleeve, so 2 big thumbs up in regards to the packaging, which is absolutely exquisite. Now, how did the public react to these records? In Lennon's home country of the UK, the 3 records failed to chart, and Lennon was upset that Apple didn't invest any money to promote it, which is perhaps why they failed to chart and only 5,000 copies of each album were pressed. However, across the pond and here in the US, the albums charted respectively at 124, 174, and 178. Critics absolutely loathed 2 versions. Critic Ed Ward from Rolling Stone wrote that Life with the Lions was utter bullshit and done in poor taste. One writer in particular, Richard Williams from Melody Maker, was given 2 single-sided test pressings, with one side being what was on the album and the flip side being the mastering engineer's test signal. And Richard thought that it was part of the album, and he wrote about it in his review, which delighted John and Yoko, where they thought that it was an instance where the critic had actually topped the artist. Now, did these records need to be released to the public? In my opinion, not really. Like I mentioned before, the intent of the Unfinished Music series and the albums that they put out was to document their lives together on record, which from a romantic couple's perspective, I think that is such a brilliant idea. But if you take that centralized idea, it can go either way in terms of the final outcome. And considering the experimental nature of Yoko's work and John's interest in going avant-garde and being as out there as possible, the final result is something that not many people would consider to be listenable. It was very ballsy for them to release these records to the mainstream buying public, and I'm sure it affected their respective reputations at the time, and some people may look at these two for putting out some very off-the-wall kind of records. Now, I think this is perhaps something that could be appreciated, and I say that very generously, posthumously, if 50 years later they said, here's some stuff that we did. That way the diehard fans can, really dig into this kind of stuff and it's at their disposal. Now, for myself listening to these albums, I can tolerate some parts of Two Virgins, particularly the tape loops that go on, but it's when Yoko starts singing that I just feel that it interrupts the record. And then with Life with the Lions, which was the one that I enjoyed the least, Cambridge 69, when I saw how long it was running at 26 minutes, I just took a deep breath and I swallowed my pride. And I also felt that with Baby's Heartbeat and such, that it was just kind of sad to listen to considering the backstory behind it. And then with the Wedding album, I found the John and Yoko piece kind of humorous within the context of quietly saying their names to literally shouting it. And I'm sure you're probably wondering, if these are your thoughts on the records, why did you buy them? Well, I'm a Beatles fan, and I do like John Lennon's solo work, and I saw these albums as a sort of challenging excursion to get through, but do I see myself pulling these records off my shelf and putting them on the turntable often? Not really. Now, if you were looking to hunt down copies of these records, UK originals are hard to come by considering Apple only pressed up 5,000 copies of each album, and chances are if you find a secondhand copy of the Wedding album, it is just the album itself in its own gatefold sleeve without the box and the extras. But between 2016 to 2019, the label Secretly Canadian did brilliant vinyl reissues and CD remasters of these albums. They come in nice, sturdy tip-on style jackets. You get nice little photo booklets, posters, and postcards that serve as download cards, so you get digital versions of the album along with bonus tracks, and all of the various extras in the Wedding album are perfectly replicated. You can get these roughly for around $20 or even less. They were mastered by Ryan K. Smith, pressed at RTI. You can't really go wrong in terms of who handled these reissues in that aspect. It surely is interesting musically, and if this video persuaded you to dig into these works, all I can say at least is that I warned you. If you enjoyed this video, please go ahead, give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and if you want to support this channel, be sure to check me out on Patreon. See you guys in the next video, and most importantly, keep the records spinning. Guys, it doesn't stop!